the wonderful Phillip Noyce a big welcome. The 5 things that Mr. Noyce thinks he did right and 5 things he thinks he did wrong.
Well, actually, there's 500 that I did wrong and a few that I did right.
Cool.
The first thing I did right was to be born in the lucky country. When I was born in 1950, when I was in high school, Australia had completely full employment, which is like 2% unemployment. In 1968, the Libs elected as Prime Minister a gentleman called John Gordon. The film industry was started by John Gordon after the persuasion of Barry Jones and Philip Adams, who convinced him that as a country that was entirely dependent on British and American television and movies, the only way to have a film industry was if the government stepped in and intervened, taking the model of Eastern Europe, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary. And so in 1968, they put into practice a experimental film fund, a fund for first short features, and a feature film bank called the Australian Film Development Corporation. So in 1968, I was 18, and I was wandering around in Glebe, imagining my future life, and I came across this thing, this poster. I had no idea what it was really about, but the word underground to an 18-year-old in 1968 was everything at that time for an Australian who wanted to watch Australian movies. So it was impossible to see an Australian film, and I went along to this screening on the next Sunday at the Inn Theatre, and there were 17 films. The most expensive of them cost $100 to make, and 8 of them were by Australian filmmakers. So I'm looking at these, I'm hearing Australian voices, I'm looking at Australian suburbs, the Australian character on the big screen there, and I'm thinking, wow, maybe there's a place for me, maybe I could do this. I mean, I can raise $100. Anyway, I sat around in the theatre afterwards and waited to see who emerged and came out, and there were 3 guys, they all had beards, and I found out they called themselves film directors. And they lived in a terrace house in Redfern, and the company that put them on was called Ubu Films. They were a collective of filmmakers. So I got talking to them, and they convinced me that I could make a movie. It was called Mediterranean Hell, taken from Milton's Paradise Lost. But that movie really got me through the next 2 years of university, that 15-minute film, because I'd put it on in with, get some of the other shorts at lunchtime in the Union Theatre, and they always, particularly the engineers, kept coming back to it. And we would charge 50 cents for a 1-hour program of short films, and would usually be full. The thing I did right was to be curious, because I followed my curiosity to that place, and that gave me a way forward. I am the most spoiled filmmaker in the world, because I got the grants from the Experimental Film Fund to make anything you wanted, your imagination, anything your imagination fell on. Then I went on to make my first feature film, which brings me to the second thing that I did right, which was to seek out mentors. We have a responsibility to each other, to mentor each other, to help each other. My whole life has been about piggybacking on other people's ideas and inspiration that they give me. From the producer of this film, I learned essential lessons, and the main ones were that as a filmmaker, you can't trust anyone else to find your audience. You've got to find your audience, but you have a responsibility to the people that paid for the movie to get the money back somehow, and you've got a responsibility to yourself. And these guys, these three guys, Aggie Reed, Albie Toms, and David Perry. David did the posters. Every day they were trying to think, but this is with experimental films, right? Trying to think, how can we find an audience? How can we promote ourselves? How can we promote our movies? And they did. I saw them fill time and time again a theatre almost as big as the State Theatre, over and over, because they used to screen out at the Rose Bay Winter Garden where the film festival used to be. A huge cinema, 1,600 seater. They feel for their experimental films through promotion, through constantly thinking of ways of selling themselves, of finding an audience. And this gentleman who was kind enough to give me the script for Newsfront was also an incredible mentor, David Elphick. And then he commissioned this script, which was the idea of which came from Phillip Noyce. The script was originally written by Bob Ellis for a film called Newsfront, which was an absolute gift to me as film director, because it was quite revolutionary in what it was trying to do. Phillip Noyce had this idea, and you're going to see how we made a film for $505,000 that looked like it was made for, I don't know, $5,005,000. Cost $505,000 to make, and it made its money back in 6 weeks. When I started making movies, the audience were like babies. You know how a baby looks in the mirror and looks at itself and can't believe what it's seeing? Well, the Australian audience and us filmmakers back in the early 70s, we had the same relationship. So the audience being able to go back in time, as there were films that went back into Australian history on a silver screen in a place that had been reserved up until that time for English and American and European films, but now suddenly they were seeing themselves up there in the mirror of the silver screen. As you can see in that sequence, you know we had 24 extras, but it looks like, 2,400 extras. The second lesson that I said I did right was to actively seek out mentors. And on that particular film, on this film, Newsfront, Ken G. Hall was a major mentor. During the 1930s, Ken G. Hall made 17 films in 9 years, 17 feature films, up to 4 feature films a year. And in Newsfront, there's a character based on him. And Ken G. Hall became one of my major mentors. For example, we had a flood sequence, and I had no idea how to shoot this flood sequence. How was I going to do it with no money? Of course, I knew that I was going to use a lot of newsreel footage of floods. I need to cut it, but even getting our characters into the floods. He said, well, put the camera up and then get a jet boat and run it in reverse, and it'll move water over a certain space, but keep the camera pointed down and never reveal where the water that's meant to be flowing ferociously, where it ends. And so that's what I did, exactly as he had advised. The thing I did right was to listen to a mentor. And it is our responsibility in this business to mentor others. The next lesson of what I did right was to leave Australia and to go to Hollywood. But the first one that I did wrong was to leave Australia and go to Hollywood. Why was it right? It was right because I was 40 years old, and how many directors are still directing here at age 70? So I went to Hollywood. But when I look back and know that I came back once to make Rabbit Proof Fence and The Quite American, 2 films that were really important to me, and I think, shit, I directed some big actors, I was inside the beast, the Hollywood machine. I observed it. I understand it now. But I keep thinking of all the films that I thought I was going to make when I was 27 and starting, that I didn't ever get to make. So there is a cost. It really does success, is it the same as financial success, or keeping working, is that as important as the work that you do or the stories that you tell? There's no right answer, which is why I would say it's one of the things I did right and one of the things I did wrong. What I learned in Hollywood principally was that Hollywood is a mind-fucking machine. And the minds that it wants to fuck are you, all of us, all around the world. And it does it so successfully. You know, the Romans had a sword. Everyone did what they told them. But Hollywood doesn't need a sword, and the Romans only controlled, you know, the bodies, not the minds, not the hearts. But Hollywood, in its heyday, when I was there in the 90s, you know, really had a machine that convinced people all around the world that Hollywood's version of reality was more important to them than their own lives, than their own reality. All that has changed, of course, with the democratization that has come in through the streamers. But at the time that I went there, I realized that principally that movie factory was a mind-fucking factory. And finally I read Rabbit Proof's Fence, and I said, oh my God, this is a story about 3 little children who are trying to escape a re-education regimen and find their way back to their culture and their home. And when I finished reading it, I suddenly thought, wow, this is a film about me, really. I need to escape this re-education center that I've spent the last 10 years in and get back and make a film from my heart. All my friends said, you're crazy, you're mad, you should never do this. Australians are not interested in Indigenous stories. You will never get the money anyway, and if you do, be prepared for total failure. And I thought about that. Well, first of all, I was determined to prove them wrong, but I thought about it. I said, this is a time for some mind-fucking to take place. And I'm going to follow those guys back in Ubu Films who would fill theatres with 2,000 people with showing experimental movies, and I'm going to take what Hollywood does and I'm going to apply that machinery to selling this movie. So the first person I hired was not a crew member, it was Emma Cooper. She was a publicist. She came on 6 months before we started filming, and she started by selling the project to Channel 9, the morning show, and she sold The Search for a Star, or 3 stars.
So my name's Phillip. Do you know what we're looking for here? That we're looking for some people to be in a movie? Yeah? Do you think you'd like to be an actress? Well, introduce us to them.
Hollywood film director Phillip Noyce is in the West Australian outback, preparing for his next film, Rabbit Proof Fence. After years of working with actors such as Harrison Ford and Nicole Kidman, Phillip is now back home in Australia, attempting to do the impossible. He has to find 3 young Australian Aboriginal girls and turn them into movie stars.
Emma convinced Channel 9 to now follow us all around the country as we search for 3 stars. Then I convinced Darlene to turn that into a documentary. For a year and a half, following us as we were going through the process of finding the girls, making the film, promoting the film for months and months in little segments, and then Darlene turned into a great long documentary, which was screened again on Channel 9 in prime time. And then the film came out, Still, Emma Cooper was working for the film. The film went into DVD. Still, she was working on the film. Film went into screenings in schools. Still, she was working on the film. By the time we finished the movie, we were in profit because we had practiced Hollywood mindfucking on the Australian and the world audience. And because Emma was there for 2.5 years. 2000 we shot it, 2001 we edited it, 2002 it came out. The film could have been like all the others. Wet your finger, stick it up, and I stuck my finger up and I could feel a wind of change coming at me from the Australian white audience. Remember, we were about to win the 400 metres. Who was going to run it? Is she Australian? What colour is she? Black. Yeah. So it was a long line, you know, from Lionel Rose through Yvonne Goolagong, who came from my hometown. So many Australians mad about sport. So many sportsmen and women were emerging, and they were not white, they were black. And at that moment, as Kathy was preparing to win again, having worn the Indigenous flag in Brisbane, you know, the whole nation was focused on that race that she won. And so you could feel that everyone was wanting to admit that we were a black and a white nation. It was in the air. From Hollywood, I could feel that wind, you know, even just by reading the Sydney Morning Herald, as I do 3 or 4 times a day, wherever I am in the world. Anyway.
And that's driven you to the first thing you did wrong?
Well, the first thing I did wrong was went to Hollywood. Yeah. The second thing I did wrong was to shoot more than 3 takes. Big mistake. Took me so long to learn that, you know. It was Denzel Washington who taught me, you know, it's all can all be done in 3. He'd come in, first take, he'd sort of find the scene, second take, he'd define the scene, and the third take, he would do something which I call banking. He would bank things that for me to discover later in the editing room. So the third take, he'd do slightly louder, slightly softer, slightly more angry, twist on this and twist on that. All things that didn't seem to make sense, but they were a collection for you to find later when you're in trouble and you needed the character to go this way, or that way. They were all there. He taught me all you need is 3 takes, because constantly you do need to keep moving on, and it's all about editing.
Yeah, so this is 1999 during Flying Phillip.
Yeah.
And that's at the point at which you learned that. And when you're working with non-actors, you know, how does that work to only go with 3 takes? If you work with people who are acting for the first time, like in Rabbit Proof Vets.
Well, they weren't acting. That's what. They were the easiest of ever. They were not chosen for acting. They were chosen for personality. Each of them had a distinct personality. Evelyn Sampi was the oldest. She's a rebellious kid. She's a rebellious adult. The youngest, you know, was a dreamer, and so on. They were taught not to act, just be themselves, and if they're themselves, then they will produce a character like themselves. In that film, I was also aided by Rachel Mazza, incredible actress from a distinguished Indigenous performance family here in Sydney. And Rachel was the drama coach for the kids. Rachel was really important to me. The other thing I did wrong, and I'll tell you this one, was not listening to the casting directors. You know, they're good at what they do because they, you know, that's their specialty. If I had to listen to my casting director, I would have chosen Brad Pitt over Billy Baldwin. I would have chosen Chris Hemsworth. If I had to listen to my casting director, I would have chosen Johnny Depp instead of the actor whose name I've forgotten who won the Academy Award. Would have chosen Timothy Chalamet On and on. Didn't listen. Read the scripts. That's the next thing I did wrong. Didn't read them. How could I not read $1 Million Baby?
Oh, you're kidding.
How could I not read Training Day? How could I not read Planet of the Apes? How did I not read The Theory of Everything? You see that cry you're letting out? Yeah, that's me every night when I dig it up. Oh, stupid. Why? Didn't read the scripts. And then Rabbit Proof Fence, she rang me, Christine rings in the middle of the night, she says, I've got the perfect script for you. It was 2:30 in the morning. I said, lady, I've heard that so many times, but in the daytime, ring back. So she rang back the next day, not that I'd already got to my assistant. I said, there's this crazy woman. When she rings, get rid of her. Okay? So she didn't get rid of her. She made friends with Christine. Christine sends the script over. The lady who was answering the phone pairs up with other people who are working for me, all women, and they all read it, and then they're like sending me to Coventry because I'm not reading it. 3 months later, I said, all right, just to shut you guys up, I'm going to read the script. And, you know, my whole life changed. So coming back to Australia allowed me to rethink who I was as a filmmaker, find my heart, but also gave me an extra 30 years of longevity as a director. Now, you know, I get in the morning, I get scripts sent to me all the time. You know, I'm getting art house movies equally to big adventure stories. Within the system of filmmaking that we all work in, and this is something that I've been trying to teach to the kids, not the kids, they're kids to me, but they're adults to everyone else, is that, you know, your relationship with actors is so important because they are the people that will get your movie made. Because that's the way in which most films are financed, in at least not necessarily in Australia, but in Australia too. So the way it works is this. Well, it was the way it worked until about 6 months ago, because it's all in turmoil at the moment. The whole theatrical market has collapsed. It's collapsed. But up until 2 years ago, the system was that you found an actor, and for each actor there's a price that distributors around the world will pay. In Germany, 100,000 or 1 million. In France, 100,000 or 2 million, and so on. And you add all that up, and what happens is you go to a sales agent, and the sales agent will read the script, and then with the actors that you've got attached to your project, they'll give you a figure, an estimate on pre-sales. Now, if they've been in the business long enough, certain banks or financial institutions will then use those pre-sales, the contracts, and will advance you the money against it. And that's how you finance independently outside the studio system. That still exists. So if you've got a project, a feature film, you're going to get a lot better response if you can find an actor. And unfortunately, it's not just any actor, an actor with kudos. The next thing I'm going to talk about, which is music. Because music is everything. Sound is everything. You know who taught me that? Federico Fellini. And he's doing the post-production on a film called Orchestra Rehearsal, minor Fellini film. But, so he's got this fat guy with a squeaky voice, and he's putting in the voices later because he would post-sync, he would add the sound later. So there's a fat guy with a squeaky voice, and Federico is not happy, so he sends him out, And he says to his assistant, go and get the skinny guy with the opposite pitch of voice. And while he's doing that, Federico completely rewrites the scene, then brings in another person and gives him the new lines, and the scene is completely the opposite of what it was 10 minutes or 15 minutes ago. And I was sort of like knocked out by that. And he explained to me, he said, look, the image, it goes into your brain, and then you've got to decode it. Your eyes, you see it, and it's got to go into your brain. But the sound goes straight into your guts. It's direct. It goes into the central nervous system. The sound is stronger than the image. After seeing the first cut of Newsfront, as I said, I went to bed. After 2 days lying in bed and imagining that I was in Walgett at the primary school teaching, I got out of the bed and I thought, I'll go into town and I'll go to some of those old 78 record stores that still existed. And I bought a whole lot of old 78 records of music of the early 50s and late 40s. And I gave it to John Scott, and the editor and assistant editor. I said, let's try some of this music in the film. Anyway, a week later, we screened the movie again, and everyone said it was a work of genius. And my relationship with the material was completely different to what I'd seen a week before, because the music and the right choice of music had completely transformed the imagery in the film. And when I first went to Hollywood, I was also introduced to another Hollywood animal that I hadn't experienced here in Australia, and that's the music editor. There I was introduced to a guy called Joey Ram, who also edited all the music for Quiet American and Rabbit Proof Fence, because from then on I would take him everywhere in the world where I did a movie. He was a music editor, and he showed me what I'd shot by adding music to my first cut. And looking at it again, I was just stunned. I shot that wow, because he had underlined, he'd emphasized, he'd magnified, he'd pulled back when I overdid it. He'd done it all with music, and it's alchemy the way it works in terms of the combination. What I found is that that music is everything. So if you're directing, I would say try and, as well as finding a mentor and being one yourself when it's your turn, developing relationships with actors, because you're going to need them. You also need to develop relationships with composers. Trust others. Trust. Chris Doyle was the guy that taught me to trust camera operators. Before we had video assist, you had to sit close to the camera and try and work out and the operator would operate, and you sat there trying to imagine what he's seeing, but you wouldn't find out what you photographed until the next night. When you would watch the rushes, the dailies. So naturally, if you can't see it and you're getting a shot the next day, you start to develop overprotective instincts, trying to get ahead of the operator and so on. And it was Chris Doyle that taught me to not try, that the best thing is not to be in charge, but to let the operator show you what he or she can do. And I felt that with Chris, I liberated myself. Trust in others is so essential in this business that we work in.
I think that's a particularly strong note to end on, because we're just at time. But please do join me in thanking Phillip Noyce so much for his time tonight.